Alright folks, how you doing? So in this video I'm going to be talking about the Isle of Staffa up by Iona in the Highlands of Scotland, and whether or not it is the Hall of Judgment and the key to the Underworld in Egyptian mythology. So this is from the book The Riddle of Prehistoric Britain on page 295. The archway of Fingal's Cave on Staffa towers 120 feet, resembling the facade of a temple, and passing inside by boat, for there are 18 feet of water. The eye meets a succession of immense bent and broken columns stretching upward to the roof. With its striking entrance and considerable length of 271 feet, giving the illusion of a great natural temple, the Scots-American MacLean last century, fired by the romance of this remarkable product of nature, put the startling poser whether the art of employing capitals and columns for temples were not derived from Fingal's Cave. Startling because if it were so, it implied that the ancient Ionians, Corinthians and Dorians drew their inspiration from it. I cannot discover that any scholar took up the challenge, and probably the historians ascribed the question to the ignorance of a crude Yankee. Was it so ignorant after all? Those who designed pillars in columnar form of the various orders of Greek architecture must have had some such guide at Fingal's Cave when they designed polygonal columns as a symbol of holiness at the entrances to their temples. What should have first induced them not merely to set up columnar pillars at the entrances to their temples, but to have incised them in the case of the Ionians and Dorians? I am inclined to the view that an apology is owed to the shade of Scots-American MacLean for the boycott instituted by men whose minds were incapable of imbibing a new idea. Fingal's Cave stands solitary off Ulva and Mull, a great natural temple to the marine gods, solitary but rarely silent. The Victorian statesman Sir Robert Peel described it as a temple where he had felt the majestic rhythm of the ocean beating in the sanctuary and swelling to a paean of praise far nobler than ever pealed from any organ. Quite possibly, indeed, its Gaelic name is Lane Bin, cave of music, often eerie music, sometimes sinister. At its softer, like the murmurings of a myriad whispering lips. Yet those who hear it when the winds rise to a gale, when from soft moans and groans it ascends to shrill screams of fury, whistling through every orifice, an increasing crescendo of demoniac forces surging onward to a height of delirium. It is as though the elements were proclaiming the triumph of the devil himself. Such is Fingal's Cave. I introduce it to your notice as the key to Egypt's underworld, for here lies Amenta. Here stood the Hall of Judgment, where the souls assembled, and where Osiris presided, flanked by the 12 great gods and the 42 lesser deities, according to the ritual. Here lay the Tuat at the ends of the earth, in the west, a name still preserved in Loch Tuath in the vicinity of Mackinnon's Cave. Take stock of that word Tuath. It is a Gaelic term signifying the north, hence the Tuatha De Danann, who inhabited these parts, the northern De Danann. It has other and even a deeper significance, for the ritual states that Ptah erected the Tuat, and he was the deity to whom was ascribed all uses of fire. The Tuat or Tat pillars were associated with Amenta, represented on Egyptian wall paintings bearing polygonal stripes on the threshold of Amenta itself. They were the northern pillars, marking the columnar regions in whose midst and crowning all others in stark significance stands the phenomenal Isle Staffa. When the mains had reached Amenta and was tried in the Hall of Mat, it will be recollected that the strange conundrum was put to him: who is he whose roof is fire, whose walls are living serpents, whose floor is a stream of water? The reply, it was also stated, was Osiris. I said then that it seemed an irrelevant question, and so indeed it appeared, for how could a deity be described in the terms of an edifice as a roof, walls, and a floor of water? Surely, however, Fingal's cave provides immediately the solution to the mystery. Yes, Fingal's cave. The day had been when its roof was ablaze with perpetual fire, when flames, serpentine, contorted and twisting, licked the columnar pillars, and when its floor, as today, was a stream of water. With that consummate genius the imaginative Celt has always possessed, of linking fantasy with reality, of dramatizing the material, Fingal's cave was elaborated into the fabulous judgment seat of the god Osiris, and that romantic cave, now the resort of trippers, became incorporated into the ritual of the Book of the Dead. Fantastically realistic was it in the same sense as the Breton account of their fishermen, awakened by the whisperings of ghosts, anxious to be taken in boatloads across the channel to Britain, and whose names and dignities they could hear proclaimed as they announced the last lap on their mournful journey to Amenta. Realistic in naming the roads and tracks which they supposed to traverse to Hades, and essentially realistic in the manner whereby the priesthood enriched itself in the traffic of death and the hereafter. Yet for sheer realism, wedded to romance, what could excel their employment of illusion when the murmuring cave became filled with the myriad whisperings of vast armies of the dead in a never-ending stream, who glided onwards unseen, but yet heard to the trial chamber of Amenta, no place of happiness assuredly. Let us allow, nevertheless, that it was not make-believe on the part of the hierarchy, who must have invented the ritual, for there were overwhelming reasons for the selection of this unique site of the Cave of Music, in an area more terribly ravaged than any other in the great catastrophe. Amenta was consumed by flames and rocked by earthquake, as was the ritual. Horus rent the veil of the tabernacle. That's a quote from the Book of the Dead. As Wallace Budge says, the Tuat was, quote, a region of death and destruction, a place where the dead rotted and decayed, a place of abomination, horror, terror, and annihilation. Geologically, we have seen that this was indeed the case. The flood would complete the sinister picture. The theologians who devised the resultant underworld cult caused Horus, after his great conflict with Set, to bury him under the Tuat pillars. This is similar to the apocalyptic version in which the old devil Satan was thrown deep in the earth under rocks and stones, or as Plutarch describes, was buried under an island off Britain where they could foretell the future by his moans and groans. The Book of the Dead describes also how Horus set out to avenge Osiris, and how in his titanic conflict with Set his eye was torn out by the fiend, which Thoth compelled him to restore. After Horus had gained the victory, defeating all the magic wiles of Set, who assumed various shapes, the demon was bound with adamantine chains and ropes, and was buried deep in the earth, after which he, or Ptah, erected the Tuat pillars over him, to chain him eternally. In metaphorical language, it describes how Horus, with his lightning, was supposed to throw Set the comet to earth in this very region. In this metaphysical legend, Osiris meanwhile lay dead and mummified until Horus removed his mummy bandages so that he was able to move his limbs and sit upright. Osiris then consumed the right eye of Horus and was at once endowed with a soul and vitality. He arose from a bier as Lord of the Dead and King or Judge of the Underworld, and in so doing typified in himself the resurrection of the body in one who was formerly a mortal man and now an eternal god. Set was ordered by the great gods to be bound with cords and hewn to pieces. All these accounts tally with the Book of Enoch, where the angel Raphael was commanded to bind Azazel hand and foot, cast him into utter darkness, and place over him rough and jagged rocks. It was a doctrine of wide world recognition, known as we see to the Hebrews, to the Egyptians, to the Britons, and it will be shown also to the Mexicans. Meanwhile, what was the underlying idea of the occult allusion to the Eye of Horus? Torn out by Set in the desperate battle between the two and replaced by order of Thoth, and also consumed by Osiris, who was thus enabled to rise from the dead endowed with a soul and vitality. I believe an explanation can be offered, although necessarily conjectural. I suggest that it turns on the island of Iona, famed from a prehistoric time by the Druids' Isle. Sir Daniel Wilson says of it, the name Hy, Hy, or I, by which Iona was most generally known, signifies emphatically the island. We may assume that both these words represent phonetic spelling, from the pronunciation of which Hy stood for high and I for eye. Hence the high or sacred isle, or the I or I, as in EY or EYE. The Old Norse word for a small isle was I, EY, and is preserved to this day in such places as Dalkai, Ireland's Eye, and others. If Iona were the Eye of Horus, the Isle of the Druids, it would explain much of the mystery, and there are good reasons why Iona should have been regarded as the Eye of Horus. The tearing out of the eye by Set is a mythical reference to the drowning of the isle in the Great Catastrophe, as happened to other isles in the vicinity, as proved by various raised beaches. Set had to restore it, or in other words, it emerged again from the depths. And in regard to this, there is a strange Gaelic poem, the gist of which is, as translated into English, that 7 years before that awful day when a flood shall drown Ireland and all else, Columba's, quote, happy isle shall raise her towers above the flood. It looks uncommonly like a folklore memory of a period long before Columba, of a flood from which Iona escaped, although it is difficult to conceive how such a low-lying island could escape scatheless from the series of tidal waves as drowned other isles, some permanently, and it may have originally described how the isle was restored. The eye of ancient times, the symbol of life, understanding, and vitality, relates especially to sacred matters, such as the Eye of Odin, which saw the entire world from Asgard, and similarly of Horus. In this case, I propose that it alludes to the Druid hierarchs who made Iona so famous and sacred. The Eye of Horus representing the Druidic wisdom and knowledge. It was they, accordingly, who endowed Osiris with a soul and vitality, and who pronounced him formerly a mortal king, the judge and ruler of the underworld, and that the ancient hierarchy of Iona was deemed to be able to decide this will be more apparent when we see the remarkable relation of Iona to the god Apollo, who, as Herodotus says, was regarded as the same god as Horus. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there for this video because that's almost 15 minutes. Thank you very much for listening, and feel free to leave comments below.